take more time during the presentation and get behind time because we're doing other stuff. We start late and we never catch up. Welcome, everybody. My name is Joe Harris. I'm the director of the National High School Center. I'm very pleased to welcome you here today, not only on behalf of the High School Center, but also on behalf of two of our planning partners, the American Youth Policy Forum and the Education Policy and Improvements Center that David has founded. So we've got a lot to do today. I'm going to go over a few of the ground rules of how we're going to go forward, and then we'll get the ball rolling fairly quickly with some opening remarks by Liz and then a presentation by David. Just as a quick reminder as to why we're here, we've said this in a few of our communications to you, but we wanted to take advantage of an opportunity to get together some folks from the various parts of the college and career readiness, TA, and resource development world to start talking about some of the strategies for organizing and aligning what is becoming an increasingly crazy world of college and career readiness and an increasingly confusing world of college and career readiness. We want to be able to make sure that our regional TA providers, who we serve as a content center, and other regional TA providers are aware of some of the resources that are out there. We want to start earmarking and designing in our remaining time as a center some new resources to support works in schools and school districts that are about going beyond standards, English language arts and math standards as a proxy for college and career readiness. We want to take that one step further, even though that's an important step, but start to deal with the reality of true college and career readiness and what that means and how to go about actualizing it. And thirdly, we want to promote collaboration, have an opportunity for some folks that may work independently in the same areas get a chance to start to work more closely together. There's a lot of work out there, especially under the umbrella of college and career readiness. So quickly, to get a sense of who's here, the High School Center is part of the Comprehensive Center Network. There are 16 regional centers plus 5 content centers. We're one of the 5 content centers. We've got a pretty good showing of folks from the regional centers and a few of the content centers. So just very quickly, could anybody who's part of the Comprehensive Center Network raise your hand, please? Okay. Then secondly, the High School Center is part of the OSEP TA&D network because we're indeed partially funded by the Office of Special Education Programs, and we're glad to work with that network as well. So we have some representatives from the OSEP TA&D centers. Could you raise your hands, please? And these are centers that work obviously primarily with students with disabilities and programs that support students with disabilities, but also have been broadening their focus, and that's one of the things we've enjoyed as the High School Center, is to be able to work closely with our colleagues in that network. And then we also have some representatives from the regional labs. I think there's an increasing focus within the new cluster of regional labs on college and career readiness, and we've been pleased that Ruth Neal has encouraged us to work more closely with those centers. Anybody from the IEL centers? Raise your hands, please. Great. And then our other major players that I wanted to introduce were some of the folks that have been working in the college and career readiness world for quite a while. In some of those cases, they're federally funded centers. I know we have representatives from the small learning communities and a couple other TA providers, but a lot of the resource developers and stakeholder group representatives are here and will be joining us sometime during the day today. So anybody who wasn't in those other categories who's part of that box, raise your hand, please. And then finally, last but certainly not least, we have and are being joined and will be joined throughout the day with representatives from the Department of Education. As I like to say, they put the gold in the gold boxes and in the green in some of the green boxes as well. So I want to make sure and have been very supportive of the work of our centers, not only as program officers doing due diligence and making sure we do due diligence, there we go, but also more importantly, as really good thought partners for us as we move forward and try to support the work that's taking place at schools and school districts and up to the states as well. So those are all the people that are here today. We've got a jam-packed agenda. The bad news is we got a lot to cover in a short amount of time. The good news is we have a lot of opportunity for breakout discussions, and we're going to be talking about that. A couple of the norms to share with you is the standard ones. You get in, you get out of it what you put into it. There are no right answers, all that kind of stuff. But I do want to encourage everybody to feel comfortable speaking up and speaking out. We have squares in the breakout room so that you're facing everybody you're talking to, and that like 3/4 or more of the time in the breakout rooms is open discussion time. So the other thing is I want to share with you that you should have picked up a packet of information. There's a lot of great stuff in here. Some of it is just emerging that we were preparing in time for this meeting. We'll be releasing several new documents. There's a website that we'll make reference to throughout the day that we've posted not only some new resources that we've developed in collaboration with our other partners, but also that we are also posting, and we've asked for many of the participants to provide resources that we're sharing on the website. We want to make it easy for practitioners at the district and school levels to have easy access to information that will help them with their very challenging work. So we're ready to get started on that note, and I want to start by introducing you to Gina Burkhardt. I was looking around for her. Now, I asked her what she wanted me to say. She said, don't say anything, just get me up here. And I'll say to you that Gina's a remarkable person. She's the executive vice president at the American Institutes for Research, where the high school center is housed along with several other centers. And she is also the director of what we call the Education, Human Development, and the Workforce Division. That's the division I work in, therefore she's my boss. I'll say to you she's a great boss, because she actually asks what you think and listens. So she's really been a joy to work with over the last year or so, year and a half, I guess. I'm very pleased that she could join us to say hello.
Good morning, everybody. I actually asked Joe if I could be here. I actually begged him because this is a topic in an area that's really near and dear to my heart. AIR is absolutely committed to the work that you're doing, that we're doing around college and career readiness. We have done some of the cutting-edge research in this area and have driven and supported a lot of the tool development around early warning instruments and interventions that really help our students, our kids, make it through high school and into college and to stay there and be prepared for a workforce that needs them and wants them. We are also incredibly personally committed to this at AIR. We have our own internal work helping students here in DC. We did the same and do the same in Chicago. And so I wanted really to be here to thank all of you for making a difference for the kids who need it the most and who are often in a place where they don't know where to get support or how to get support to get through the challenges of high school, let alone figuring out and deciding where and how to get into college, and then where there might be financial support and support once they get there around the transitions. My daughter is a sophomore in college. She is a particularly average student. She will never be a Nobel Prize winner. She has been a struggling reader all her life. She doesn't know what it means to read for pleasure. She has been incredibly lucky to have teachers in high school and a support system in high school that helped her identify the right place for her to be in college and the right focus for her to find success there, although she struggled desperately. If you're a mom and you ever had a freshman in college, you understand that no matter how well you think they're prepared, they never are. And mine called home almost every day, and I was like, I really, do we have to talk today? Didn't we just talk yesterday? So the point is, there are so many kids who don't have the same kind of fortunate support and help, and what we do and what you do makes things better for them. So thank you. And then I get to introduce a very good friend and partner to us in our work, Liz Grant. Before I do that, I want to do a shout out to Fran Walter, another person from the U.S. Where is Fran? Oh, I thought you were over there. U.S. Department. See, I can't see without my glasses. I should put my glasses on so I could see. We've worked with Fran for a very long time. Does that mean we're old, Fran? It does, doesn't it? Yeah. Someone committed to excellence, who holds our feet to the fire and who demands that we do really great work. Thank you, Fran, for all your support and help. Now for Liz. Liz is a special assistant in the Office of Elementary and Secondary Education. She also has a passion for this work and has had a long career working in the area of college and career readiness. Her bio is in the book. Please take a look. It's quite impressive. I won't read it all to you because maybe unlike my daughter, you're not a struggling reader, so you get to read it for yourself. She comes to us today to help us think through some of the issues and exciting opportunities around college and career readiness, and we are extremely pleased that she's willing to be with us today to share a really important day of work. So thank you, Liz.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm going to echo Gina's thanks to you for being here and for being part of this, and echo her passion and engagement in this. This is an exciting thing to be part of, to talk about technical assistance, to talk about college and career readiness, and to do it with some of my colleagues from the Department of Education. Angela from the high school group is here, as well as Fran, who I get the privilege of working with too. So glad to have all of you here, and I bring the greetings of the Department of Education, and particularly our Assistant Secretary in Elementary and Secondary Education, Michael Uden, and he would have liked to have been here too, but I am in his stead. So I get the opportunity to say thank you. It's good to see so many technical assistance providers here together and talking about the same thing, working together and building a collaboration and a network. I'm excited about what can come out of this. When we at the department say college and career readiness, we have a really short little phrase to express what we mean, and that is that all students will be prepared to enter post-secondary education and training without the need for remediation. It's a phrase we whip out really quickly. It answers a lot of questions. It moves us through a conversation really fast and gets us out of a tough conversation really fast. And it is simple, it's direct, it's measurable, it's useful for us. It is one of the ideas that's driving the big administration initiatives right now. It's driving Race to the Top, where states are trying to implement these college and career ready standards. It's driving school turnarounds through the School Improvement Grant Program. It's driving ESEA flexibility, where, as you know, 11 states have been approved for waivers from No Child Left Behind. One of the things they had to do under that flexibility is write a plan about how they were going to implement college and career ready standards in their states. 27 more states have now come in applying for that flexibility. We may have 38 by the end of just this second round, with a few more planning to apply for this in the fall. The idea is also driving the blueprint for the reform of Perkins reauthorization that the Secretary announced on Friday. So the blueprint is focused on college and career-ready standards and how those align with the needs of the workforce and industry and employers, and getting students to that mark through the career and technical education program. But this phrase that all students will graduate high school, prepared for post-secondary education or training without the need for remediation, is incredible shorthand for all that is happening and all that needs to happen to meet that very simply stated goal. What is required, I think, to move closer to that is what you're doing here today, and what Joe and the National High School Center and AYPF and EPIC have brought you together to do. And that is to get a more sophisticated understanding of what college and career readiness is. It is what is captured in some of the elements of Joe's great organizer on college and career readiness, what is in the college and career readiness school diagnostic tool, what is in AYPF's logic model, and what is, I think, in a couple of other tools that we'll be introduced to today. In addition, what is required is sophisticated technical assistance. This may be even harder than trying to write down what college and career readiness means. But this sophisticated technical assistance needs to help states implement these college and career ready standards and the effective strategies that will move the work forward. It needs to help schools create, and states and districts create, a continuum of supports for schools doing this work, and interventions for schools that are struggling to do the work to implement this. It needs to create sustainable organizational structures at the state level, at the district level, at the school level to help sustain this over time. And it's the blend of these two things, a sophisticated understanding of college and career readiness and sophisticated technical assistance, I think, that's going to help move this forward to meet the goal of college and career readiness. I appreciate the work that you do and appreciate the chance I have to work at the Department of Education and learn about the work that you do. It is an environment that I have stepped into and worked with Fran on, and one of the luckier pathways that I've been able to take, and am just so impressed with what's able to be accomplished by what you're struggling to do as you blend these sorts of things together to create something new and try and push the world forward in some good ways. I see this symposium as a way to build a collaborative network. It's a way to build coherence across technical assistance efforts that may be new in the way that we work with each other. It is a way to encourage knowledge sharing and collaboration that will strengthen the provision of TA. We have 50 states, a few other entities like Puerto Rico and District of Columbia. We have some outlying areas, but we have 15,000 districts in the country and tens and tens and tens of thousands of schools. So the capacity that needs to be built in order to drive this kind of work forward in those settings is just almost unfathomable. But what can be created here, I think, is a network that can help lead this work, a network that can learn from each other and start to build that understanding and that capacity to spread that out. So that's what I'm hoping happens as a result of some of this, is that this is the leading edge of some of this work, that it'll lead to that sophisticated knowledge of college and career readiness and the sophisticated knowledge of technical assistance that's needed to build that. I thank you for being here and for being part of this, and thank Joe for his work, and particularly for having created this organizer that's going to be such a useful tool. And in fact, just one little thing is as he mentioned with Ruth Neild and IES, that she's so excited about it as a way to think about research and evaluation and to capture some different aspects of things as an organizer for them in their work and in our work as we try and make that phrase, college and career readiness, a little more real and a little more complex so that we can start to work on the many different aspects of that in the programs of the department. So thank you, thanks for being here, and thank you for setting this up.
Thanks, Liz. Thanks for your kind words, but more importantly, thanks for your day-to-day involvement and support. And I think that's been very critical in our ability to move forward and even in our desire to move forward. So now I have the opportunity to introduce David Conley. Now, I could read his bio for you. I could cite all the great things he does, but I think I'll just do a little admonishment. If you don't know who David Conley is and you're working in college and career readiness, you don't need to be in the room right now. David has been doing this when it wasn't popular. He's been a champion. He's written some outstanding both research and other great documents, guidance documents. He's helped develop tools. He's spearheaded the creation of the EPIC Center, Educational Policy Improvement Center, and he's really an interesting presenter. So I'm going to get out of his way because he certainly can speak for himself, and I hope you will. I know I enjoy even watching his videos on the website, so I'm hoping we'll get a nice video here as well as a live presentation. So David, pleasure.
Well, let me add my good morning to those who preceded me, and to thank you all for being here. You've traveled a long way, I think, in many cases to get here. I just was thinking as I was walking up here, this is my second of 4 trips to D.C. in a 4-week period. So when you live in Oregon, maybe I have to rethink my priorities here because this is a lot of time on airplanes. But I did want to be here with this group, and I wanted to share with you in a very kind of rapid-fire, kind of high-level overview of the complexity of college and career readiness. And I chose that title because what I don't want to do is fall into the trap where I think we're falling into in some places, which is in policy circles, sometimes the number one priority is to solve a problem. It's not necessarily to get it right. It's to solve the problem. And part of solving the problem is specifying it in a way that it can be addressed pretty easily in the policy process. And I think some of what we're seeing in the college and career readiness area right now is a tendency to try to encapsulate this, put it into a form that is amenable to solution by policy fairly simply, and then, wash your hands, move on to the next policy problem, which is how the policy system operates. Unfortunately, we've got a real complex situation, something that has been kind of building for 200 years in the U.S. in a sense, because we never designed our educational system to prepare everyone for post-secondary education. We have purposely and consciously disconnected our educational systems at every level in a way that almost no other country in the world can match. So in that sense, we're number one. But it's not necessarily the number one that we all want to be pointing to. Now, as the economy has changed, as our social needs have changed, and the structure of our society has changed, we find that what we need is an aligned, connected system that creates the opportunity for all students to receive an education that enables them, if they choose to do so, to continue learning beyond high school. That's the heart of my definition. That's the heart of the policy issue, and that's the heart of the problem at the same time. So with that, let me just kind of walk through then some of these issues relatively quickly. I think we would all agree we've entered a policy environment that is focused on college and career readiness. The name has come up even to the point of if and when ESEA is reauthorized. It's one of the potential names for, if we rename the Act, it could conceivably be the College and Career Readiness Act. That much of a focus. We know in the waiver process that folks are adding college and career readiness components. And states are doing this, I don't want to say grudgingly, but I'll say grudgingly, because it means them having to connect with between high school and college. And the people who are writing the waivers are the K-12 folks. And to think about college and career readiness means they have to talk to their post-secondary folks. That's not something that they do naturally or normally. They don't have the forums for it. They don't have the connections and the relationships. And particularly for substantive conversations, as opposed to debating budgets, there just aren't the means and the mechanisms for doing this. So the waiver process has created some interesting dilemmas. The ESEA reauthorization, I think there's relative bipartisan agreement in principle to the idea that all students ought to be ready to keep learning beyond high school. We've seen the occasional blip on the political radar screen in that regard, but for the most part, I think it's an area that it's very promising in terms of its potential for bipartisan agreement. We're seeing individual states on their own launching out and creating college and career readiness goals, and very often they're tied to a cut score. I'm going to come back and talk about that a little bit more. and suggests that even though a cut score might be a useful policy instrument, it's probably less useful at each level you drop down in the system. When you drop from the state to the district to the school to the classroom to the student, a cut score becomes more and more limited and less informative of our decisions and our actions. And yet, if we set it at the policy level as our sole indicator, the likelihood is it's going to trickle down the system in just the way that I described, leading to largely inappropriate uses that will not help us to achieve our goals. So states are moving forward, but they're not moving forward necessarily in complex notions of college and career readiness. In fact, they're going the opposite direction. They're trying to simplify it. The Common Core state standards clearly reference college and career readiness, but as I could share the validation committee that reviewed those standards and the process that was used to develop them. But one of the issues is it's really kind of, even within the Common Core, it's kind of unclear exactly what they mean by college and career readiness. Although I can make a pretty strong case that they probably have the right elements, I think their specification is somewhat ambiguous. And this leads then to ambiguity with the Common Consortium assessments. You're familiar, I'm sure, with the two national groups of states that are putting together assessments under the sponsorship of the U.S. Department of Education. And those assessments have with them a certain amount of a challenge of trying to clarify their focal point on what actually college and career readiness consists of. And the challenge for them is that they test only English and math. And even though we know it takes more than English and math to be ready for college, there is nevertheless a tendency for us to back in to the assumption that if we can get those tests right and get the cut scores on those tests right, then we've established what college and career readiness is. And I'm just hearing more and more of that floating around. And even though people periodically correct themselves and say, well, this is not all there is, then they'll go right back to saying, well, but this is going to be the cut score and this is going to be college and career readiness. So I'm asking, when I picked the title on purpose, the complexity of college and career readiness, because I want you to be aware that when you hear these conversations, that you want to be careful not to subscribe, I think, at least certainly without, giving it some thought, to the notion that a couple of scores on a couple of tests are going to get us where we want to be and solve the problem for all the kids in this country. For me, the complexity part gets at the fact that college and career readiness are major policy goals, but we're not clear on what we mean by the terms. And Betsy Brand and I were talking beforehand about the fact there's probably a half a dozen different efforts out there right now to define college and career readiness. They all have some common components and they all have some distinctive elements. So we're at this phase in the policy process where we're into this what's called issue definition. And we think if we can define it, then we can solve it. In fact, you have to define it, and nevertheless, with this issue, it's going to be a complex definition. The authors of college and career readiness standards assume the mechanisms that standards and assessments are going to drive curriculum and instruction that will lead to more students being ready for post-secondary education. My point to you will be that standards and assessments are necessary but not sufficient. There's way more to it than that, because college and career readiness are way more than just a particular identifiable set of content knowledge skills. When we were doing state standards and state assessments, we lived in a smaller universe. We lived in a self-referential universe. In other words, the state standards were the definition of whatever it is we were defining, and the state tests were the operationalization of that definition. And the definition was some sort of a well-educated person. The problem with college and career readiness is there's an absolute reference point, which is what it takes to be ready to go to college and what it takes to be ready to enter the world of work and pursue a career pathway. There are specific things you must do. It cannot be self-referential. It references a subsequent state of being. So standards and assessments are the beginning. Curriculum instruction help get us there, but there's more to it than that. And as I've noted here, it's more than a single score. I'll also note that college and career readiness are similar. They're not exactly the same. Notwithstanding some publications that came out 5 or 6 years ago that suggested because some alignment could be found between two sets of standards, a work set and a college set, that we'd solve the problem. I don't know if you had a chance to pick the article up outside. Could someone have a copy of that? You just kind of wave for me. Yeah, thank you, Betsy. So it's from this month's issue of Education Leadership. I authored an article called College and Career Readiness, Same or Different, I think is the name of it. Thank you. So I would encourage you to take a look at that. It gives a little bit of history in the background of how we reached the conclusion that they're the same. Well, our work suggests they're similar, but they're not exactly the same. And I think it's a useful and valuable distinction to make that is actually creates a more inclusive set of possibilities for students than a less inclusive one. It creates the opportunity for us to identify more students as successful and give them valid routes to positive and promising post-secondary opportunities than a more narrow definition that will, by its very nature, cause some students to be identified as failing and not meeting a standard that, if we use a more inclusive mode, I think we can find a way to validate their efforts, their skills, their capabilities, and their interests. So my point is that success in post-secondary education is a function of readiness across multiple dimensions. Now, people don't like to hear this because the more things you add, the more things you have to do, and the more things you have to measure. Nevertheless, if we think about readiness, though, as alignment among students' skills, interests, aspirations, and their post-secondary objectives, and not just a test score, you see it takes us in the direction of saying it's likely that different students are going to have slightly different constellations of skills and knowledge, and as long as they've met a certain floor, now we can't have some people who are just great at something and then they can't read, or they're great at reading and they can't do any math at all. There's got to be a floor, but once we pass that kind of foundational level, the idea that a well-educated population is one where everybody can do calculus is probably not realistic, valuable, or even worthwhile as an overall policy goal. What is worthwhile is to have different profiles of knowledge and skill built upon sound foundations that will establish the capability of all people to be lifelong learners and adaptive citizens. We do not want to exclude anyone, and we particularly don't want to set arbitrary standards that cause some people to be identified as failing or as not meeting the standard, when in fact they have compensating capabilities that will allow them to be successful in their lives. And if you think about yourselves, I mean, a few of you in this room are probably Renaissance people, but most of us are stronger in some areas than in others, and we play to that. We go through our lives with adaptive strategies that allow us to utilize our strengths and compensate for some of our weaknesses. And we may periodically address those weaknesses and improve, but we know we're not equally prepared or equally competent, capable in all areas. So let's make sure that when we think about students, we're thinking about their skills, interests, and aspirations in relationship to their objectives. Part of that is making sure they have clearer objectives than they do now, and I'll come to that in just a moment. So our current measures are insufficient for determining the alignment because they pick 1 or 2 points, as I've noted before. They might pick an English score, a math score, or they might be a cumulative grade point average, or they might be a list of courses students took. They're just simply not sufficiently nuanced for us to understand what the match is between the student and the interest or the post-secondary goal. In essence, what we have in place is an aspiration gap, because what we've managed to do, we've been successful in one regard in that we've convinced everybody they should go to college, haven't we? I mean, if you ask kids in school, they will tell you that, what's their goal? Well, I want to go to college. And it's sort of like almost, like a conditioned response, right? It's like, what are you going to do? Go to college. I mean, it's not always thoughtful, but nevertheless, we've convinced them. The problem is, as we move through the system from middle school on, what we see is the downshifting of aspiration. We see the continuing lowering of the aspirations of students, not the increasing of the aspirations. We don't see more and more students desiring to go to 4-year institutions and more students desiring to go to even to 2-year institutions. We see it gradually going down, and the largest drop-off, based on our data, where we've conducted using an instrument that we have, that we've administered over 20,000 students, largely in inner-city settings, is that it's poor students from low-income backgrounds and minority backgrounds whose aspirations decline the most rapidly. Middle-class students, upper-middle-class students, their aspirations either hold steady or increase. So think about this. The importance of aspirations are that they set the upper limit of performance, don't they? How likely are you to perform beyond your aspirations? I mean, if you aspire, we don't have any golfers in here, do we? If you don't aspire to break 100, do you do anything to try to achieve that? Or do you just go on the golf course and have, what do they call it, a nice walk ruined? I mean, most of us match our efforts to our aspirations. I mean, would you get a master's degree or a PhD if you didn't aspire to something as a result of doing that? Think about our young people going on to college. If they don't aspire to go on to a 4-year institution or aspire having a high-level technical certification, why in the world would they do anything in high school to prepare for that? Aspirations tend to dictate the upper limits of performance. They don't cause it to happen, but they set the limit of the most that the student can be expected to do. So I think it's really important for us to be looking at this aspiration gap. So here's a visual that kind of makes this point. If we start with 100 middle school students, 93 say they want to go to college. We have been successful, haven't we? That's really quite impressive. And these, by the way, these are fairly constant no matter the economic, social environment. Of those, 70 graduate from high school, so that's a 22% drop from the 9th grade. Of those, 44 enroll in college. That's now a 37% drop from those who graduated. Of those, 26 earn a college degree. That's a 41% drop from the previous. And if you'll notice, each one of those numbers is greater. Each one of the percentages is greater than the preceding one. In other words, it's a diminishing returns model. My point is not that every student needs to graduate from college. It's that we are seeing one direction only, which is that we lose students at each step along the way at an increasingly rapid clip. It is not easy to get prepared to succeed in post-secondary ed in this country and to go on and do so. And yet, we've set up a society in which increasingly access to careers and to good jobs is based on certificates of one sort or another. They could be a 2-year certificate. They could even be a training certificate. They could be a 4-year degree. They could be a graduate degree. All of those are certificates in my mind. We've created a society in which access to most jobs requires some form of certification by some sort of educational agency. So thinking about this and the limitations that this creates for the potential for so many young people is one of the real strong rationales of why we want everyone to be able to go on to learn beyond high school. So the comments that I'm making today come out of a number of different sources. That the picture in the middle is for that educational leadership article. That's the issue it came out of. I've also have a number of books on the subject, a couple of which are up there. I might mention the book College and Career Ready. I do talk about my experience being first in family to go to college, which also does shape my point of view. Anyone in here first in family to attend college? Got a few folks. Yeah, well, the book kind of is, in the foreword I write about what it was like to have parents who wanted me to succeed and wanted me to go on, but didn't really have any idea what I should be doing, including not waking me up on the morning I was supposed to take the SAT. So I suppose I should put that on myself, not my parents, but to this, but that's what kids do anyway, is expect other people to help them make good decisions. Getting out of high school and not having any clear goal, and then being fortunate enough to be able to enroll in a community college that was down the road for me, but not having a plan to do it, showing up the first day at the community college with no schedule. I mean, just the list goes on. Sounds familiar to some of you. I can't point to one adult who saved me or anything like that. I don't have a great inspirational story in that regard. I was lucky that the system gave me some options and I was able to pursue them. On the other hand, there were a lot of adults who did challenge me and who helped me get the most out of my capabilities and skills. It takes a lot of things going right, though, to be able, to be standing here as opposed to being, in Santa Cruz, California, where I went to high school, working construction, where a lot of my friends are. Now, I'm not trying to say, they got good lives too, and I'm very, pleased for them. And some days I'd rather be doing that than this, but particularly the days when the surf's up. But if we're going to have young people have opportunities in their lives, we've got to make sure that it's not dependent on happenstance. And for so many of our first-generation students, large decisions end up hinging on small things. They don't get to the community college the day they're supposed to register. They don't fill out the FAFSA. They don't. They get wrong advice from somebody who just tells them, "Well, don't worry about it. They'll give you financial aid, whatever it might be." They make a bad decision taking classes when they're in high school, scheduling themselves based on when their friends are having lunch, not on what they ought to be doing to meet requirements. The list goes on. We have a system in which the probability and the possibility of making mistakes is so great that it is almost assured it will happen for many, many students. I was meeting with a delegation from Ireland about a year ago, talking about this notion of college and career readiness. And I said, so tell me, how do you deal with problems in college readiness in Ireland? And he looked at me and he said, we don't have any. Meaning that the system is designed to where the students who go to college are prepared to go by the time they go. The things they do in high school are carefully aligned with what they'd be doing in college. Students have all the information. The system makes sure that if you need to apply for something, you apply for it. It's not left to chance. It's a very different notion. Now, the difference is, of course, they don't have a system where all students go on to post-secondary education, but nevertheless, the model is such that it's far more, it's difficult to go off the path if, the system sets you up for more success, for greater success. Our current model's far more concerned with eligibility than readiness. We want students to take the right courses and write tests, and based on that, they're admitted to college on what I call a hunting license model. As a faculty member at the University of Oregon, when they issue me a parking permit, I now have the right to drive around and see if I can actually find a parking space. When we're admitting students to college, we're kind of doing the same thing. We say, now you have the right to kind of drive around and see if you can find a class that you can pass. And, oh, by the way, maybe you can graduate, maybe you can't. We certainly are not specifying that as a function of admission. I mean, what if we said that? Congratulations. As a function of you being admitted, we are pretty much guaranteeing that we know you have the capability to graduate. Now, you could certainly do things to cause that not to happen, but as an institution, we are sure you are capable of graduating. And I don't think if I put that out there and said, let's put that into the reauthorization of the Higher Ed Act, I think the post-secondary people in this country would be up in arms to say, you can't expect us to guarantee that our students can succeed. It's an odd notion, though, if you think about it, that we're going to admit people where we have no real idea if they're capable of succeeding. Well, as I noted earlier, there's a lot of definitions out there of college and career readiness floating around in the works. Mine is pretty much consistent with Liz's. It's the level of preparation students need in order to enroll and succeed in a credit-bearing course. Success is the ability to kind of keep on in your program and be progress beyond that. Some people turn that into a letter grade, which is great. I mean, for me, once again, it's more complex than that. It's really the ability to pursue your goal, and it ultimately comes down. It's relative. It's not. It's are you well enough prepared to pursue the goal you have? So many young people go into college and change majors, change colleges, drop out, drop in. It's a very complex model in the U.S. compared to other places in the world. And to our credit, we're a second chance system where you can kind of mess up and still come back and succeed. But in California, they're having to pass regulations because students are piling up 100 credits in the community college and have no certificate at all. They're just sort of trolling about. With the financial aid implications of not being able to move quickly through the system, I think the priority has to be on students being ready to go to college, ready to succeed, do so efficiently, particularly for first-generation students, or else they just won't have a chance to make it, partly for the financial aid reasons. Well, the Common Core State Standards, this slide's got a lot on it. I don't think we're going to spend a lot of time. I just want to make a point with it. The Common Core Standards are aligned to college and career readiness, but they're less clear and precise in their definition of what college and career ready means. Although I've been in plenty of presentations with them, and I don't mean this to be critical, where they just kind of gloss over this. But in the actual document itself, if you say, what does it say about English language arts literacy standards? They say that they define general cross-disciplinary literacy expectations that must be met for students to be prepared to enter college and workforce training programs, ready to succeed. The mathematics standards are entirely silent. They say it's access to knowledge and skills necessary in their post-school lives. So I think, the authors and the owners, whoever those might be, of the Common Core State Standards, at some point I need to go back and commit to what these mean relative to college and career readiness, because there's a real implication for the assessment side of the equation. Must every student do all of these to be college and career ready? Are there some? Are there combinations? Would we entertain profiles? Is there a foundational base? What is it? And I don't think we're there yet, and I think that's going to really be the implications in the common assessment is going to be significant. Well, we did do a research study, and one of the principals on that study, Katie Drummond, is sitting over here, and that study showed us that the Common Core standards are applicable and important in a wide range of post-secondary courses. The cognitive challenge is sufficient. They're coherent representation of knowledge. They do not omit key knowledge and skills. And they're a core of knowledge and skills common across general ed and a set of career-oriented courses. And the career areas tend to have very different profiles than general education. You can download this for free off our website, which is epiconline.org. And this was basically the result of analyzing nearly 2,000 entry-level college courses in 25 subject areas. So if you want to get a sense of the relationship of the Common Core State Standards to college and career readiness, I would recommend this report to you. National Assessment Governing Board, which produces NAEP, has a slightly different definition. They talk about preparedness, which is focused on academic qualifications that NAEP measures. And I give them credit, though. They say readiness includes behavioral aspects of student performance which are not measured by NAEP. And I'm looking in the future to make sure when we see these definitions of college and career readiness that it's clear what they are and what they aren't. And if it's a test score, what it measures and what it doesn't measure. What component, what part of college and career readiness does it represent? Another way to think about this is to think about different levels or types of career readiness. And even though this is laid out in a vertical way, there's some of this that probably isn't entirely vertical. But at the first level we want for students is work readiness, but unfortunately that's kind of a depressingly low level. It's what when you ask employers what they want from students, well, gee, it'd be nice if they showed up on time. It'd be nice if they didn't get in fights with their fellow workers, and it'd be really cool if they weren't on drugs. But you kind of want a higher standard than that. Job ready is that you've got the knowledge to begin a particular entry-level position. That's really a function of job training, and that's almost always employer-based. Pathway ready is this. Can you go into a formal program of preparation in more depth that leads you to a career pathway, and very often associated with community colleges. Post-secondary ready is can you deal with a wide range of post-secondary courses, and career and life ready is then the idea that you can pursue a career and fulfilling life as a productive citizen. We don't want to ignore the fact that there's more to all of this than just the academic and the work component. So a lot of times particularly when we focus on high school graduation, we're focusing somewhere down around job ready, unfortunately, and that's just too low of a standard and too low of a set of expectations. The model that I use has 4 components. I'm going to talk about this in the breakout session in a lot more depth, so I don't intend to go into it in a lot of detail here. You can find more information on our website as well, along with a narrative explanation. And there's some other publications, articles that are available on this too. The short version of it is that college and career readiness consists of 4 components: key cognitive strategies, key content knowledge, key learning skills and techniques, key transition knowledge and skills. And you can see a little more detail on each one of those. To summarize them, we use 4 action verbs. You need to be able to think, know, act, go. We find that's useful for teachers and for students, although for some reason people kind of just garble up the order, I've noticed occasionally. But you get the general idea here. Can you think? Can you deal with higher level cognitive processes, and not just sort of critical thinking in that kind of nebulous way, but can you really deal in depth with a series of skills that are associated much more frequently with post-secondary learning? No. Do you have a structure of knowledge? Do you understand the structure of knowledge? Do you value it? Do you attribute your success to your effort? Act. This is really an important one, particularly when you cut across college and career. Do you have a set of learning skills and techniques that you can use that involve owning your learning and then being able to manage your time, being able to study, being motivated to do high-quality work, being self-aware, being a help seeker, knowing how to get help if you need it, being persistent. Some people call it determination, grit, resilience. I've seen a lot of different terms, but can you keep going when you need to, so forth. And then the last one is this key transition knowledge and skills. Can you navigate the complexity of the post-secondary system? And that's what I mentioned earlier. We've got a very complex system. It's knowledge intensive. You talked about your daughter. I've got 3 daughters. My first daughter, I think we did a pretty good job. We got her through okay. She went to the University of Oregon. We're very proud of her. The middle daughter did the same. The third child, we ended up. My wife by then had been filling out applications and actually worked in the high school career center for a while. She kind of knew the system. And so we ended up doing 9 applications and all this jazz. She got into MIT. We're very pleased that she did that. But the one lesson I draw from that is, as a matter of public policy, I think the key really to making sure that students can navigate these systems is to make sure that people have a lot of children, because that way you can get it kind of worked out on the first couple. Anyone know what I'm talking about? And then by that third one, then you know what you're doing. So, Yeah, so that's the complexity of that system. So think, know, act, go. The cognitive strategies model, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but really it's about how do you utilize a series of carefully developed, systematically created and enhanced thinking skills to deal with complex problems and issues. And this is an example of how you would deal with a complex cognitive strategy. A student would conduct research on natural disasters and choose one and write a policy paper or an annotated outline for a paper. For the Conference on World Disaster Reduction, the paper outlines how to mitigate the impact of this type of disaster and discusses the trade-offs involved with the suggested policy choices. So they've got to formulate a problem, they have to conduct research, they have to interpret their findings, they have to communicate it, and they have to do all that with precision and accuracy. The content knowledge, the Common Core gets you part of the way there, but you've got to think about it in terms of the structure of knowledge, not all the little pieces, and that's really the heart of the problem. Is we're teaching kids pieces and parts, we're not getting them to link things together, and the brain just does not remember what it cannot organize. So much of test prep is just absolutely bad instruction because it never lets kids create meaning for what they're learning. And getting them to relate and engage in the content in the lower right-hand side. One of the really key things is attributing success to effort, not aptitude. And I don't know if you know, there's a little story about a volleyball just washed up on the beach in Alaska, and it was from a kid in Japan, and it was inscribed, it was given to him by his friends when he went to a new middle school. And you know what the inscription on the volleyball said? Work hard in your new middle school. Most American kids would not say that, you know. They would say, hey, party hard in your new middle school. It's a different notion of effort versus aptitude. And in this country, too much of the explanation for success and failure is aptitude. So to get students to succeed, they've got to believe that they can do it as a result of working harder. The key learning skills, the ownership of learning, I've ticked off a lot of these. You can see some of those on the list again here. The asking for help. Which kids tend least to ask for help? The ones who need it the most. Who asks for help the most? The ones who tend to need it the least. It's an inverse system. We've got to teach kids how to ask for help. This is particularly true in college, by the way. First-generation students use resources less than the middle and upper middle class students. And then in the same area, the key learning techniques, we don't teach kids to do these things. Some kids learn how to do them, or their parents teach them, or they go to camps where they get instruction or support in this. But the kids who need to know this the most get the least instruction in doing this. And we are just not teaching kids these specific learning techniques. So collaborative learning, for example, working in a study group. Who learns how to do that? Kids who are studying for AP exams. They create their own study groups. My kids created their own study groups. No teachers did it for them. But in college, study groups make a huge difference. And once again, the students who are first generation, low-income ethnic minority tend to use study groups less. So we need to teach kids to do these things specifically. And then the key transition knowledge and skills, a lot of boxes there because there's a lot of things to know. And I won't go into them all, but you can kind of just glancing at it, you get a list of it. It's fairly daunting. And any of you who's ever worked in a high school, I spent 20 years in public education, anyone who's ever worked in a high school and chased a kid down a hallway to get him to fill out a form, or to go get their transcript fixed, or with your own child, going over the transcript and finding an error and trying to get that repaired. There's so much adult intervention that occurs to make this successful for kids that it's just fairly amazing that the system works at all in some senses. It's very resource dependent, very relationship dependent, very knowledge dependent, and what I call privileged knowledge. It's easier for some people to have this knowledge than for other people to have it. All right. So career example pathway for college and careers. Here's an example of kind of where the overlap occurs between academic skills. If you look at the learning strategies that you need for a technical degree and how those are similar to what you need for a bachelor's degree, I'm just the one example here. An environmental engineering technician, you can see these are the kind of things they do. They conduct pollution surveys, they perform statistical analyses, they review technical documents, they provide technical support. What kind of skills do you need? Critical thinking, reading, judgment, complex problem solving. Think about how those overlap with what I just showed you in my model. There's an increasing set of core skills, and not just the content knowledge, but those learning skills and techniques, those cognitive strategies, those are the overlaps that we're finding in all three of those areas. And you notice here there's both an associate degree and a certificate. I didn't put a bachelor's degree on here because it's an area where you can do well with less than a bachelor's degree, but look at the skill level it requires to do that. All right. So regarding college and career readiness standards, I made some of these points at the beginning, so I won't spend too much time here. English and math content standards are necessary but not sufficient. We need cognitive strategies, learning skills, and specific information about transitioning. This one example from the Common Core, you'll notice, read closely to determine what the text says explicitly, make logical inferences from it, cite specific textual evidence when writing or speaking. By the way, this is not one standard, it's really 3. When people use semicolons to hook stuff together to make it one, and it's not really one, that's a problem. But anyway, take a look at the questions I've asked you are things for you to think about, this one standard. What would competence look like? How would competence be different in different types of texts? How would you assess this? And what does this look like across grades? This is worth thinking about when I say the complexity of college and career readiness. You take this one standard and you take a look at it, you start to break that apart, and you say, wow, what would this look like in terms of performances? And you realize there's a range of performances, a range of texts, a range of ways to assess this. I'm not trying to make this infinitely complex at all, but I'm saying that to do this well, you can do it a lot of different ways, and do it validly a lot of different ways. So no single test can gauge all of what's necessary. Cut scores are appropriate, but they're error-prone when you move down the level toward the individual. And a single score from a single measure is the likelihood that policymakers will end up misusing that is fairly high. Okay. Given the complexity, we should think in terms of a system of assessments rather than one test or score. We've got things like grades already, student self-reports, complex curriculum embedded performance tests, behavioral assessments, non-content-based measures can help us create a profile of readiness in relation to the goals that students have, and we can give students recommendations on how to improve their readiness in relation to the goals. Increasingly, we're seeing talk of badge systems where it acknowledges what you can do right when you can do it right, and helps to start put that profile of interest together at the same time that we keep working on a core of foundational skills that we don't ignore. All right. Well, with that, it's 10:30, and I think you wanted to take a couple questions, or?
Yeah, we have a few questions. If there are any burning questions from the floor?
Burning or burned out? Well, I went through that fairly quickly, but okay, go ahead.
In the last slide, you talked about a sort of a portfolio of measures that could be looked at as a profile together, sort of creating a complex individual profile of a student. What strategies would you suggest we use in engaging the policy community around trying to elevate the validity of locally assessed, locally judged, locally graded student performance after a decade of obsession with state and nationally validated tests? And also, what advice would you give practitioner leaders as well in terms of trying to create some kind of systemic coherence to engage? Because on the one hand, you've got policy makers who are skeptical of local wisdom, and you then also have the sort of teacher autonomy issue around private grading practice. So what's the strategy for beginning to elevate that whole dimension of assessment?
Gee, that's a little tiny question, isn't there? All right, well, I'll try to do the short version of this answer and do it. I will do the question disservice, and maybe you and I can probably talk later about this. But the short version is, number one, I think we've got to be ready to increase the validity and value of grades. I mean, that's a huge issue I'm taking on right there. But I think allowing everyone to just make up their own standard, in practice, make up their own assessments and their own standards in the classroom and enforce this on students, no one's been willing to take that on. So at some point, that's a huge amount of information that's largely being wasted. We're seeing grade point averages inflated over time. They're one whole GPA higher now in high school than they were in the 1980s. ACT and the U.S. Department of Ed studies have both been able to confirm that. So we're approaching the point where we've added an extra digit onto the right of the decimal point in these GPAs, and now we're acting as if there's a real difference between a 3.42 and a 3.51 or something. I mean, there's no difference in actual performance. So that's one thing. We've got to think about that at least. maybe just kind of wade into it. Maybe have some benchmarking type of tasks that go on in class that contribute to the grades. Increasing, we're seeing end-of-course exams contributing to the grades. So there's maybe some opening there. And end-of-course exams is maybe another opening. The idea that embedded performance tasks might be a triangulation device. You don't use it as a sole standing measure, but you triangulate the grade against the performance task. If the student does terribly on the performance task, it creates an upper limit for how high the grade could be. I mean, I can think of a lot of mechanisms to where you start putting this together where the policymakers aren't giving away the store in terms of validity or reliability. It's not a validity problem, it's a reliability problem. But we're still moving practice in the direction of being more complex. But I'm also okay with some measures that are just like, did you participate in a post-high school experience, you know, as something that is built into your profile. You have to have it in there. Some things can be dichotomous measures, and you either did it or you didn't do it. And I think within this badge notion, there is space for us to create, if you want to go into a program in environmental studies, you might be expected to have some greater depth in science and some greater evidence that you've done some scientific experiments, for example. So, and I could imagine also having this being somewhat based upon your post-secondary aspiration or interest. So I don't think it's impossible to get policymakers to buy into this. Most of the systems around the world use far more information than we use. This is not as if we're leading the world here at all. And the ones who are more test happy than us, which are a number of the Asian countries, are all trying to go in the direction of adding more complex information because they have the problem with an effort-based system. What do you think their problem is? The students are topping off these content knowledge tests. They're getting no useful distinctions or discriminations anymore in their pool because everyone does pretty much, you know, they get all the right answers. What they're not getting is a lot of creativity, a lot of kind of problem solving, a lot of insight, a lot of interpretation. So that's the direction it's going. Advanced placement may be adding more, as it does its course redesigns, they're looking at adding more assessments that occur in the classroom by the teacher, but then can get moderated externally, that some of it gets rescored to make sure the teacher's scoring accurately. The technologies are coming. There's a conference in DC next week talking about wider range of measures. The technologies are getting better. There's a lot of other things. You can do situational judgment. You can do self-reports. You can do ratings systems. There's a lot of other things that are out there. We're going to have to learn how to put them together. But that actually is the short answer, believe it or not. So, yeah, I don't want to get you off schedule here. So we just.
Any other question?
Well, thank you all for your attention. Thanks very much.
Note to self, don't put yourself on the agenda after David Conley. I'll remember that for the future sessions we hold together. Thanks, David, and certainly appreciate the information. David's going to be around all day. He'll be in one of the breakout sessions immediately following this presentation, and will be available again throughout the day to continue conversations. I've had the pleasure of getting to know him a little better, getting ready for this meeting, and one thing I didn't say in that he clearly demonstrated is he walks the walk, and so that's been really, and takes on all the challenges that we're facing as we go from a simplistic view of college and career readiness to a more complex one. So I want to take about 10 or 15 minutes of your time very quickly to talk about something that's been referenced, what we call the College and Career Development Organizer. It's not a framework. I'll talk about what it is in a minute, but I want to just make reference that in the second slot in your whatever we call this, your notebook or your portfolio, there is what's called a College and Career Development Organizer, and there are 3 handouts that are actually more detailed descriptions of the 3 strands that I'm going to talk about in a minute. But I did want to share very quickly why the National High School Center got to the point of going to the department and saying, we need to really look at this area a little more closely. We'd like to have come together, bring together a lot of the folks who are working in high school and college and career readiness areas to tackle this big issue, because we see over the last couple years, as we're getting more and more requests from states and districts and the regions through the regional centers as well, the challenge, and that David, I think, has articulated well, that it's a complicated field, and that the definition of what it means to be college and career readiness isn't clear, isn't explicit, and certainly isn't shared, depending not only from state to state, but from program to program and the like, and that those definitions that are emerging are policy definitions. They're not really definitions that ultimately get to how do you actualize it. We chose the term actualizing for the title of this meeting because actualizing means different things to different people depending on what level you're working at. Obviously, state folks are looking at policies, they're looking at certification and the like. District and school folks are looking at students and trying to get them out the door with some degree of or some ability to be able to succeed going forward. The other challenge we started to notice over the last couple of years is, let's face it, it's a 100-year-old model of the way high schools work. And for the last few years, the way they've been working is to add more and more programs on top of a model that isn't really geared, was always intended as a sorting model, not a model that was there to support all kids to succeed, especially in this broader area of college and career readiness. And then, so, adding on more and more programs without making sure that they all align with each other is clearly a fairly large challenge. And then thirdly, as David has really strongly emphasized, there aren't a lot of measures, and there haven't been a lot of measures about what it is not only for what kids should know and be able to do, but then also how do we know when they've gotten there, when they've arrived at the point where they don't need to spend the second half of their senior year just staring into space, waiting to get out of there to get on with their lives. So there's another handout that I want to call your attention to, and this graphic or word cloud is on that handout. So about a year ago, the High School Center took on the challenge of starting to look at all the players and what all the players are doing around college and career readiness. We looked at over 70 organizations. Many of them are, some of the ones are here. We obviously didn't invite all 70 of those. But we looked at organizations that said they were doing something related to supporting college readiness, career readiness, or dropout prevention. And some of them overlapped in more than one. And what emerged out of those 70 organizations is we found 13 separate definitions of college and career readiness. They're included in this packet that you have, and this word cloud comes from looking at those 13 definitions. I'm sure more will be emerging. We're not saying that these are the definitive definitions or that any one of them, because the role of the High School Center is to be objective. And so what we're trying to say is there are lots of different considerations out there, different ways to look at college and career readiness, but it's really important to start from a vision of what college and career readiness means. So what we started to do when we were looking at the work of these organizations, looking at the types of resources that are out there, we started to see that everything that we were looking at seemed to fall into three strands. First of all, a goals and expectations strands that we call for college and career readiness that really got into the question of what should graduates know and be able to do. What is the point they should be trying to get to be college and career readiness? Secondly, there was another strand that we saw was how do they get there? What are the structures? What are, first of all, the policies? What are the structures, even organizational structures? What are all the different supports within a schools, outside of schools, that all come together to help high school students meet the expectations that are articulated in the first strand? And then thirdly, what are the outcomes and measures? How do we know we're there? Of course, we talked about that for a few minutes. And so when do we know how do we know they're there, and when do we know they're there? So we saw these three big organizer strands as the big, and we call them strands because we thought of them metaphorically as kind of strands of a rope that are intertwined together. And so we continued our metaphor a little farther and started to break down those strands into what we call threads, because obviously if you're if you're deconstructing a rope, then one of the things you're eventually going to get to is a set of threads. And so we saw several threads that run through the first strand. First of all, the biggest and most obvious one was the core content that we've talked about in terms of the Common Core for state standards, but the common standards that states adopt to say these are the threshold of knowledge that you need to know, that kids need to know and to be able to do. But we also saw that there are individual state standards that get into some of the other subject matters besides English, language, arts, and mathematics. And we call all of these, again, the core content. But we also noticed that there was a set of work and a focus around the pathways content. The special, first of all, the general knowledge of what's the distinction between different types of pathways. What does it mean to want to be in a health career or some of the other careers that David cited? What do you need to know? What is the pathway? How do you get there? What are the steps involved? What are the eligibility requirements? We call that some of that college and career knowledge, and how do you get to it? What do you need to do to be able to access and be able to tap into that? And then how do you make good, intelligent decisions? What do you need to know about the content? What do you need to know about the pathway to be able to make and set a career goal and then set on a set of paths? And then specifically, what are the skill sets that you need that are specific that go beyond the general knowledge, but are the skill sets that you need that are tied to the specific content standards? I think the OVA just came out with a set of guidelines under the reauthorization for the Perkins grant that starts to get into these pathways and courses of study that relate to what you need to know around pathways content. And the third area we saw, David has his Think, God, David, I've already forgotten. Think, Know, Act, Go, which are clearly at least two out of, and almost I think three of them, really focus in on all those extra types of skills, starting first of all with social and emotional skills, resilience. What is it that makes certain kids able to self-manage their behavior when they get onto school, to be disciplined in doing their work, etc. And also just in general to have a positive, to be able to advocate for themselves and the like. What are the kind of specialized higher order thinking skills that go beyond the rote memorization? What are those employability and academic skills, the studying, being able to get there on time, being able, as you say, to go through the day without fighting with anybody, and being able to conduct yourself in the appropriate manner. And then those lifelong skills around being good citizens, eventually being good parents. And in there, I think an important area that David and I have been having sidebar conversations around are what are the kinds of financial literacy and college literacy that goes beyond the knowledge of what you need to do, but helps you make really the right decisions, the balance between how many years of post-secondary education or what types of training you need, what's a good investment in terms of taking out financial aid, how you'll be able to recoup the costs for college over the course of your career. All of those around what we call lifelong learning skills. Then we have the second strand, which we call pathways and supports, an individualized program for every student. We're going to hear an example in the panel this afternoon of some of the work in Arizona to get to that point. A kind of like an IEP for every student, a path that gets students not only the foundational knowledge, but eventually gets students all the other types of skills they need for their individual post-secondary pathway, but also for those that come into high school or come into the latter half of K-12 experience, starting in middle school. There's also strategic interventions and targeted interventions that get at what kids don't know and need to know, and that includes content recovery as well as, in the parlance of the Carnegie unit and that whole approach, credit recovery to be able to exit appropriately from high school without having to drop out. The second big strand, or the second big thread in the pathways and support strands, looks at the rigorous curriculum and instruction that is kind of the goal of all school improvement efforts right now, but also then looks at these well-defined pathways. There are programs such as Connect Ed that Brad's going to be talking about that focus on academic and technical skills, the specific pathways. We know a lot of CTE programs focus on very specific pathways for knowledge acquisition and knowledge development. And then built into that, not only internships for business, but a variety of activities for post-secondary experience that brings not only college culture or college-going culture, but career-going culture. I have a very simplistic approach myself when people ask, is it college or career, which is it? And I say it's college for career, because ultimately it's career for everybody. The question is, if you broaden the definition of college, then you're looking at a variety of training opportunities where community colleges and certification programs become just as much a viable post-secondary opportunity than college itself. And then the third thread in this area we call the aligned resources. That's the work that people do to try to bring it all together. The physical structures of extending learning time to promote college and career readiness, for example. The use of career academies, the use of advisories, not just done disjointly like they sometimes are in many of our schools, our high schools, but done as part of a concentrated and comprehensive program, and then providing teachers the training and the time to work together, to collaborate themselves. So lots of work among, again, all those organizations and in the broader field of the practitioners, hopefully around the role of the community, CBOs and other community organizations, not just for internships, but as partners helping us in the K-12 environment and helping those in the K-12 environment deal with the many challenges that kids face, and looking at supports that come not just from not from educators within the K-12 community, but come from the broader community. And then finally, aligning resources, leveraging resources, trying to get more bang for the buck, which is especially important as we're going forward and we're seeing less and less opportunities for new revenue. So the third strand that we looked at is the outcome and measure strand, starting first with the on-track indicators to make sure kids are getting the academic and technical skills they need, that they're going to school. A lot of work in the high school center has been around early warning systems to keep kids on track to graduate. We recognize that that has to transition to early warning systems that get kids ready for college and post-secondary, others post-secondary pathways, and that they're successful at that. And then the certifications, I think some of the questions that just came up around not a cut score, not just a Carnegie, which is a 100-year-old type of graduation certificate. We had a meeting in the Midwest last year. I put up my father's transcript from 1932, and the only difference between that and the Carnegie unit transfer, the Carnegie unit transcript today was an extra credit in science nowadays to cover Sputnik and discover everything we've done in outer space that has happened since 1932, and no extra credit for the 2 world wars and several other things that have taken place, or the creation of computers or anything. But making sure that we have in place a set of ways to measure when kids have attained the necessary knowledge that they need for their post-secondary endeavors. And then thirdly, that there are feedback loops in this thread that get to the accountability report cards for the schools to say, are we doing the right things to support kids, and are we using data? It's about using data, 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 data. So those are the 3 strands. Quickly, the organizer, we want to make sure, is not used as a sense-making tool. It is a sense-making tool, excuse me. I jumped ahead to the next slide. The organizer is indeed a sense-making tool. It's about promoting and mapping all the different things that are going on. I'll jump ahead to the next slide to say it's not a framework. It's not about defining stuff as is. It's the building blocks. It's a conversation starter so that we can sit here and come from our different worlds of TA providers, researchers, resource developers, community-based organizations, advocacy groups, you name it. We can come together and try to have be able to see where we are, not so much where we are, but we can together go and help states, help school districts, and help individual schools figure out where they are and where they need to be, so that they're not just thinking about, I'm due college and career readiness, we've adopted X name standards. That's what we do. That's our program. That we think about a more comprehensive program that's around all three of those strands and that moves forward. That we look at the building blocks, the strands themselves, the threads, and we'll be talking a little bit more about some components as well that you see in your handout, that those can be building blocks that folks can put together. So what is the organizer is not, is it's not a framework to be adopted de facto. It has the ingredients of a framework. We're going to look at 4 different frameworks today in the breakout session. I said there are many more. We've put some in the packet for you. But what we want to say and what we want to promote is looking at those frameworks. Do they work for you? Can the indicators that we've created, can the organizer itself and the elements within the organizer be used to put together a contextually appropriate framework? Because we believe that there has to be a local context to the framework, and that we believe that it's important, therefore, to get the right stakeholders at the table to talk about what the local needs are and how to actualize college and career readiness at the local level. Secondly, it's not a checklist. Too frequently, and one of the reasons we're sometimes reluctant to put out these kind of tools is that people turn around and then say, yes, we do this, no, we don't, yes, we do, no, we don't. We don't intend it to happen that way. If you're going to use it, please hold off on using it that way. We are going to be producing over the next few months several tools to help you. There's one in the packet as well, a facilitator's guide and a set of facilitated questions that are also mapped to the organizer. And lastly, again, it's not a how-to guide. The other things that we've put in the packet, the explanation of the different strands themselves are just that. They're not how-to guides. They're explanations of a variety of examples that are listed. So, quickly, the hierarchy. Strands are those big 3 areas, what we call what kids should know and be able to do, which are goals and expectations. The second strand, pathways and supports. The third strand being outcomes and measures. Those are the big 3 we want to get people to feel comfortable talking about, where their work is situated in one or more of those 3 strands. Those strands break into about 9 threads that are listed again in the handout, and they in turn break into and deconstruct into a set of components for those that want to get more and more detailed on the level of the work. And the final component in the organizer is a set of examples, not specific programs, but types of programs like dual enrollment and other types of programs, and where they fall in to the overall landscape that we call college and career readiness. So what we're going to do now that we've kind of created some common understandings or knowledge about college and career readiness itself and the complexity is spend the next, the remainder of the morning asking you to join one of 4 conversations. If you look on the back of your name tag, you should have a color-coded assignment to one of the 4 sessions. We're going to be looking at 4 different models using, again, starting the conversation with using our organizer as a lens to look at these 4 different models to see how these models address different elements of the organizer, and then opening the conversation to a broader discussion with everyone in the room about how to not only apply an organizer type approach to the work that you're doing individually and how that work fits in with a broader landscape of college and career readiness, and then to look at and to talk a little bit about how to assess and measure what it means to be college and career ready and how to measure the effectiveness of the different work that we all do and how to help schools and school districts come up with ways for them to assess their work as well. So that's how we're going to spend the rest of the morning. I think we're going to start in a minute or two, and then I think at 12:30 we're going to break and provide you all with boxed lunches, since we want to promote an opportunity for everybody to talk together informally and network. There's not going to be anything going on during that 45-minute lunch period. And then we're going to come back here at 1 o'clock for a panel discussion to talk to some practitioners about the role in technical assistance has played and suggestions and lessons they've learned that might help us inform our work for our afternoon discussions. Very briefly, sessions 1 and 2 are right out the door. Session 3 is downstairs, out the door and downstairs in the Francis Scott Key room, which is away from the Francis Scott Key Bridge, which is over there. For those who are Washingtonians, it's in the opposite direction. And then the fourth breakout is in the Washington room, which is on the 3rd floor above us. You're going to have to take an elevator, go out the door to the right. We'll have people to help guide you. You have a few minutes. Let's take a 10-minute break to help you get there. I'm, again, trying to stay on schedule so that we can give you more opportunities to talk among yourselves. Thank you so much for our panel, and we'll see you here at 1 o'clock. Take care.